So let's give a very warm Google welcome to James Cracknell and Beverley Turner. Please welcome them. Have a seat on the comfy chairs.
Thank you.
Here with us. So welcome to Google.
Thank you.
And it's the first time we've met, but James and I met a little bit when I was crashing out at the bottom of the British rowing team as he was escalating his way up towards a couple of gold medals. So it's very nice to welcome you both.
We want to work here.
You want to work here?
You don't want to work, you just want to have a cafe.
Yeah, I don't want to work here. I just want to have lunch here and use the library and the gym and sleep in the library. Obviously nobody
don't give anybody ideas. That's what we want to do. So maybe we could start the conversation with, and we'll give everybody a chance to have a chat with you as well, but we were just looking at some video there, which was, I think, the beginning of James's race across America, and which is when he had a bike accident. We'll talk about that as well. But Beverley, just tell us a bit about what that was. What stage in your kind of life was that, and what was James doing?
We, funny enough, James has never seen that, so that was actually the first bit of he's ever seen that. I was actually giving birth the day that transmitted on television, so I vaguely remember watching it. When he was actually doing the trip in America, it was July 2010, and it was a coast-to-coast trip for the Discovery Channel. Could he be the quickest man to go under his own steam using Olympic disciplines, because it was 2012 as well, so running, cycling, rowing, and then swimming to Statue of Liberty. That was the plan. Anyway, he got as far as Arizona and then ended up spending a month in hospital, which was definitely not the plan.
I don't think you should laugh while saying
No, I know. It's just so ludicrous, really, and and that's so we're 2.5 years out from the accident.
So 2.5 years later. And James, you're watching that for the first time, you say. Hadn't seen that footage before. Do you remember much of it, or how much do you remember before?
I remember that was the bit it was going into the run. I remember that stage of it. And I remember actually right up to where I got hit by the truck. So we left from Santa Monica Pier, which is the end of Route 66, cycled into Death Valley, and then I was running through Death Valley, which was about sort of 75, 80 miles. And then back on the bike up Route 66 to Lake Erie, and then I was going to row Lake Erie. And so I can remember the bit of Death Valley was just, I think it's just been re-awarded the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth. And it was 50 degrees. Even at night it was 40 degrees. And I think it probably went on to say that, I consumed on the run, which took about maybe sort of 18, 20 hours, something like that.
So that was 18, 20 hours to run. How far exactly? Was it 3 marathons?
Between 75 and 80, I think.
Right, 80 miles.
It was 3 back-to-back marathons.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, I was not.
You sort of
I wasn't Highbury Gabri Selassie pacing it.
Okay.
It was more fairly steady. But I drank 35 litres of fluid in that time and still lost 8 kilos. So it's just so hot, and you go running past signs that are minus 100 metres below sea level, and don't stop, turn your air conditioning off. Not that I actually had any when I was running, but it is a pretty brutal place considering it's developed country.
Horrible, horrible. I was actually there to watch him finish the run stage, which is unusual because any of the trips that he normally does are so remote that you can't be there to kind of give him a hug to come across the finish line in the South Pole or whatever it is.
But this was near Vegas.
Yeah.
So this one
You spotted that one. I like that, man. So I'd had a weekend in Vegas,
yeah.
and then drove into Death Valley. But there's no mobile signal. It is appropriately named Death Valley. It's brutal. It's a horrible environment to be in, and James was at the peak of his physical fitness. I would say, I think even as a rower for all those years and having won 2 Olympic gold medals, I think he was at his physical peak actually at, what was that, 38 years old? About 38, yeah.
Yeah, but when I won my Olympic gold medals, I was piggybacking off 2 guys who were pretty good.
No.
So whereas you're running on your own.
Yeah, we're not buying that. So, I mean, we'll come on to what you've been doing subsequently in a minute, but I mean, just fill in the blanks a bit for me, James. So, when I knew you, you were kind of sleeping on people's floors and eating baked beans out of a can and trying to break into the British rowing team. You then had a couple of Olympics which were frustrating for you, and then you kind of won a couple of Olympic gold medals, and people will probably know that about you. So just tell us a bit about, you won Olympic gold medals, and then you became this kind of bold adventurer type with that slightly camp guy from the TV. So what happened?
Yeah, no, I think it's, that's a good snapshot of...
It's your CV, right?
Yeah. No, I think retiring from sport is difficult. You only need to look at the last 5 or 6 weeks as to what's happened to people you think should be happy or came back for different reasons. And you think, if you look at, take Michael Schumacher, there's why would someone come back who'd won that much and then not come back in the team that could have given him the opportunity to win? You take Ricky Hatton, who struggled, after retiring and didn't go out in the way he wanted after fighting Manny Pacquiao. You take Freddie Flintoff, who he didn't retire on his own terms because of injury and not looking after himself, so he went back into the boxing ring. And I think it is really hard to retire and come to terms with the decision. And psychologists tell me that it takes you 2 years to genuinely retire and not look at sport in the same way and think, oh, I wish I could do that. And so I've made a decision not to compete for a year after the Athens Olympics. And you get invited to parties for about a week after the Olympics, and then the invites go. And I was at one of these parties when the slightly camp bloke from the TV comes up. I hope you're not watching Google, Ben. And said, I'm going to do a rowing race across the Atlantic. Do you want to do it with me? I was like, can you row? He goes, no. I go, no.
Probably.
And then I realised I didn't have a goal for the first time in a long time, and thought about it for a month, and I thought actually it might be a really good distraction, and give me time to think about whether I wanted to row in the Beijing Olympics or not. And
so at that stage, you were still thinking you probably would, or
I was thinking, because of that run up to Athens, we'd had a lot of injuries, and I mean, I went from a 2-man boat to a 4-man boat, and in fact, our first race as the 4-man boat was the Olympics. So it was. I just wasn't ready to commit to another 4 years straight away, right. And that's the real difference.
And by then you were already a couple.
We had a 10-month-old little boy at that stage. So
you'd seen James go through the Olympics and win the medal, second medal.
Yeah, I think the word you're looking for is supported James go through the Olympics, not seen.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Tell us more about that, Bev.
It's hard. Being the wife of husband, wife, partner of an Olympian is really hard. I mean, I watched London 2012 and you see, Mo Farah's wife there on the sidelines running on when he's won, which still just looks wonderful. And I just thought, oh, you've been through hell, haven't you? Because the sacrifices that, the Olympians inevitably have to make, and, it's everything. It's the complete focus of their life. And so as the partner, you kind of standing, sort of going, come on, when's this Olympic final? Let's get it over with and we can get on with our life. And James obviously won the gold medal. That was all marvellous. And then said he was going to row across the Atlantic for 2 months, which was not what I had in mind at all. I was thinking maybe a holiday, or spend some time as a family, because we'd actually spent very little time as a family. So I was really hacked off about it. And Ben Fogle's wife was very supportive.
I didn't enjoy it, if that's any consolation.
No, you hated it. It was actually. I like the fact that you didn't enjoy it. But when he came back, it was actually the best thing he'd ever done.
It was?
It was the best thing he ever did, yeah.
Why was that? Why do you say that?
Because I think, as James was saying, you have, as a sportsman, I think when you're retiring or you're trying to work out what you're going to do the rest of your life when you're in your 30s, it's such an identity crisis, because what do you do? How do you go from living such an exciting and demanding and challenging day-to-day existence and all the adulation that comes with winning Olympic gold medals?
Matt rode, by the way, so you realise that you're not. That's not how it is at all. Yeah, the adulation really.
I certainly don't remember any adulation.
No.
Not necessarily quite as successful.
But maybe James can't sit still long enough to do a job like you do, Matt. That's the difference. Is he needed to be on the move, and so actually to have this trip, which made him decide what he wanted to do, and he wanted to make his hobbies into his job, which was to do this kind of thing.
So he sort of found this by chance, thanks to chance conversation at
yeah, with
party.
Ben, yeah. And then obviously raced to the South Pole and did all the various marathons and stuff like that.
So, and just because it seems to me there's an important difference between being a supportive wife, watching somebody trying to win an Olympic gold medal, and waiting for him to kind of phone in that he's crossed the Atlantic in a rowing boat. And that is, what's the worst that can go wrong in a rowing race is,
Yeah.
well, you might not get the medal. I know about that.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same thing as the danger that is being all at sea in this.
Yeah, it's funny
Funny
though. I mean,
And since then, he's done lots of dangerous things, right?
yeah, but they're not really dangerous. They're not, he's not a base jumper. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but, I mean, I'm such a safety girl. I'm a seatbelt and a condom type of girl. And not at the same time.
We have 3 children. That's not
Yeah, clearly not often enough.
Not always.
I've always been
unlucky.
I've always, from being very young, I've always been about self-preservation and safety.
I think that should be the title of your next book. Seatbelts and condoms.
Seatbelt and a condom.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite careful, and so for me.
Well, not really.
Keep going. We're with you. We're with you.
So I actually always worried more when he went out on his bicycle.
Right.
For me, that was the most frightening
in
thing.
and around London.
Just going out of the door on his bicycle, or used to ride a motorbike. I had much more of a problem with that than I did, because with all of these trips there are, safety measures in place, and the Atlantic row was probably actually the most dangerous.
Yeah, I think the things that I've done, they may be remote, but it's going to be your mistake that is a problem. The Atlantic's slightly different because there are tankers that are on autopilot, and you need to make sure you're aware of it.
Now you tell me.
But the South Pole, it's generally such a deserted environment. It's your decision and the environment. Whereas on a public highway, you are liable to other people making mistakes. You can't control other people's behaviour, whether that be on a street in London or a train or a plane or on a road. Whereas in the South Pole, there may be a knocked off penguin, but there's pretty much everything else is going to be down to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you did the rowing across the Atlantic thing. You did the South Pole exhibition. I think quite a few people have seen that on the TV, the documentary that you made there, which was, again, looked like very, very tough conditions.
Tough conditions, yeah. It was tough in that the temperature was not very nice. It's not it's not an easy place to go because everything takes so much longer to do in order to. Just
And in the TV show, it looked like you also. The sort of difference between James Cracknell, the somewhat extreme Olympian, and the other more regular guys in the team, it certainly looked like you were pushing it harder than the guy. I mean, I've read the book, and I think your view was that you were portrayed in a little bit of an extreme way in that, in terms of.
Yeah, I think there's, in terms of, as well, that you're in a sporting environment, you're in a racing in a boat and training with 8 people, and your thoughts and opinions may be here and here, either end of the scale, but there's always the target, which is to win, and so that brings you back together. Whereas if you're with people whose end goal is not the same, whether it's to get there but not get there as quickly as you can, there isn't that same focal point to bring you back together. So it was very useful for me in terms of learning how to work with other people, but there's a mentality of a elite or full-time sportsman that is different from some people. You think with Bev, we've come a few Olympic receptions that we've been to, and I didn't think that it's quite as positively as she meant it to be. Well, I hope she meant it to be. She said, she's like, show me a room of Olympic gold medalists, and I'll show you a room full of insecure people. I was like,
It's true, though, isn't it?
It's true.
It is true, isn't it? You know that.
Is it with judging
I
your
couldn't
basic-
possibly.
Come on, all your Olympic gold medalist friends. It's true. I mean, I think there has to be something about wanting to, prove yourself, because,
Or
I mean,
think-
thank goodness. And I
or
did
being
also
judged
say,
by something other than your self-fulfillment and belief in
I can
yourself,
see that.
judging by
It's
a
an
kind of
exterior
target
kind
of
of-
other
And I guess that's your
people's-
thing about
Validation.
finding your next thing, which is going to validate you or give you
Exactly.
the goal, etc.
Which I don't think is particularly mentally a healthy place to be. I think the guys I went with, Ben and Ed, they found self-fulfillment in a different way rather than it being something extra. sort of that is outside.
Yeah, just getting there would be fine for them, but you wanted to get there and beat the Norwegians.
Themselves. Yeah, and I kind of
in your first attempt.
Yeah.
There won't be a second.
Rewarding, but then we'd also said we'll be. I'd take the philosophy within training that, with me and with them, if we make it as uncomfortable and as hard as possible here, we try and make it worse here than it is there. No day there is going to feel that bad. Whereas if we don't train that hard before we go, it's going to be really horrible if it's nasty. We're just going to go, and we're miles from anywhere.
So just on that point, I cycled in this morning through Richmond Park, and having read your book, I had in my mind the image of you climbing over the gate of Richmond Park with a bicycle tyre, which you were then going to drag round the park in training for this event during the night, so not to disturb the kids.
Yeah, I have to
that's
say
what you were doing.
It was because it's very hard to recreate pulling a sledge, so you basically drag a tyre. Not a bicycle tyre, it's more like a lorry tyre. But the reason I had to climb the fence is because every year they have a month where they cull the deer in Richmond Park. So it's like 8 miles to walk around the outside. And so it's generally open 24 hours a day to people on bikes. So there's lots of weirdos cycling around at midnight when there are no cars, and they obviously have proper jobs. And they can't get out during the day. And so they lock the gates then. So I had to climb over, drag this bloody tyre over the fence, and then walk round. And every so often you'd hear a crack of a rifle. I think, oh no, this is sort of slightly surreal. Lucky I didn't go in my antler hat, so I was all right. But it's just, you don't want to, at that stage, well, you were pregnant with Trixie, with Kiki, weren't you? But so we have a family and everything else. It was more beneficial to us as a family if I trained when the others were asleep, and so it did mean I was a bit of a weirdo going around the park in the middle of the night pulling a tyre.
But it's true. I was just going to say, people, obviously, all that training, it must be very selfish and blah, blah, blah. And actually, it did used to be, but I think what James has sort of managed to do quite well, and I think anybody who works and has long hours, it's so hard to find any kind of time to put exercise or anything into your day. I mean, I don't really get to do any, but there was one night when he was training for the Marathon des Sables, which was another event that is on one of the DVDs and the book, actually. And we'd been to a black tie event in London, and I was actually driving. And we came out, and James gets out of his suit and puts on his running gear, and it's midnight. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm going to run home. So I drove down the A4 back out to Chiswick, where we live, from the centre of town, and James ran home. And I think he pretty much beat me there, I think.
That's pretty normal. I used to do that all the time when I was pissed. You just glossed over another thing there. I want to move forward a bit, but just briefly, Marathon des Sables, James, this is, how far are you running that?
It's a series of marathons in the Sahara Desert. So you sort of, it's a marathon every day for 7 days, 6 or 7 days, and then one day they decide you do 2 marathons. But you carry all the food and everything you need for the week.
It's literally over sand dunes, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sand dunes and rocky jebbles and then sort of just sleeping in a tent with no
we're sort of throwing around Olympic gold medals and gold medalists as though they were kind of 2 a penny, but I think one of the remarkable things is it's quite hard to get an Olympic gold medal. We're taking them for granted here now, but also you're the fastest Brit, I think, ever to have finished the Marathon des Sables.
Yeah, no,
it's pretty impressive for a guy of 100 kilos.
I was really, thank you, and I was really chuffed because I decided to do it. Well, there's 2 reasons why I decided to do it. The first one was that I was at the South Pole and we'd had the thing about being honest with each other, and I'd sort of, as I said, made us train very hard for it, but we also said we'd be really honest. So if we're struggling, it didn't matter what weight we all took, as long as the 3 of us and all our kit got to the South Pole. So someday if you're feeling good, you take more. If you weren't, you feel, you wouldn't feel bad about giving someone else some weight. And over the first week, the others were struggling a bit, so I took some of their weight. And then I started to struggle, and I didn't say. And so I ended up getting really nasty blisters, a bit of pneumonia on my left lung, and it really slowed us down. And I was at the South Pole with my kind of feet really not very good. And there's lots of weirdos at the South Pole for various reasons. And this one comes into the tent, and he goes, oh, you think those blisters are bad? You should do the Marathon des Sables. And I don't know why at that point I thought that would be a good idea.
He's like, yeah, that's a really great idea.
I'll go running in the sand. But it did. The second reason why I did it was I wanted to show in a competitive environment I could make the right decision at the right time. So stopping in the middle of a race was quite alien to me, but 2 minutes, 5 minutes there would save an hour further down the line. And it was, for me, making that decision then was something I wouldn't have done in the past. And I think that's why I did do better there is that I made the right decision at the right time.
It's an amazing programme. Mm-hmm. It's my favourite film of all the James's films. It's just a fantastic filmmaker called David Harrison, and it's just the most brilliant documentary. And like you say, it was Easter time, and I was with the kids down in Devon, and just got the odd phone call to say, he's alive, he's fine. And then when he called and said, oh, actually, I came 12th. And how many people were?
There's 1,000 did
1,000
it
runners.
that year.
Came 12th. Oh. Well done.
The guy who won it.
Fastest ever Brit, which is amazing because they're all tiny little gazelles.
Well, the guy who came over and we did some sort of heat testing for the documentary before he went, and the guy who'd won it the previous year came over, Moroccan guy called Mohammed, and we just sort of ran in a 50-degree chamber on the treadmill. And he got off the plane from Morocco, gets to the chamber, and the first thing they do is give him a thermometer to stick up his bum, because his core temperature could be monitored, and if health and safety was breached, he could be dragged out. And so he wasn't delighted about that. The first thing, this is not a very good country. But we ran for an hour in 50 degrees, and I lost 4 kilos, and he lost half a kilo. And that's just how attuned he was to it. So
sort of up to here on you.
He was not very big, and you get the same amount of water every day. So they give you water for every carry your own food.
Oh, I think
so he was like showering in it, whereas I was like every drop was a prisoner.
So I'd like to move it on to sort of what happened sort of at your accident and then after it. But just before we do that, so all of the stuff you'd done up to the point of the race across America, I mean, what would you say was the hardest, and what would you say you were most proud of?
I think I was probably most proud of the Marathon des Sables in terms of making the right decision at the right time, and having learned from the others and showing that in a competitive environment I could sort of separate the two. In terms of what the hardest, I think probably the first week of the Atlantic I found really hard, because everything I'd done previously, as you said at the start, is that what's the worst that could happen? Well, you might lose that race, and you might lose the race. But even I remember sitting on the start of the Athens Olympics, and I was making sure we were straight in the lane, and I could see the finish tower 2,000 metres away, which is our race distance. And as much as you should be thinking positive things, I thought, cool, that's a long way. But the difference between that and the Atlantic is that it was the first race I'd done where you couldn't see the finish line, and even after you row a week, and we're still 3,000 miles away, and that was getting my head around that a target that seems so far away, and even if you break it down into chunks that are big enough to take something out of the overall distance, but small enough to get your head around, was really hard. And it took me a week to get myself into the right space to.
So mentally very hard.
Yeah, and I think
he kept ringing and crying on the phone.
Yeah, it was not very good time.
Ben Fogle cried a lot. Ben Fogle does cry a lot most of the time.
Yeah, okay.
But James doesn't tend to cry an awful lot.
Yeah.
But he'd ring on this big satellite phone.
But you sounded like you weren't really bothered.
No, I wasn't. I was just like, yes, suck it up. You chose to be here. The children are, Croyd's fine, thank you.
So let's.
The ability to be positive in any situation is something I've learned as well.
I see how the supportive wife does.
Yeah, you like that.
That's good. I wish I had one like that. But let's go to a different phone call. So that you got a phone call telling you that James was in hospital, and what happened then? What happened next?
Well, that was, I was back in Vegas having a lovely time, and I got a call at sort of 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, just to say, don't go back to London, you need to get to Phoenix. James has been hit by a truck. And at that point I didn't know what the prognosis was going to be at all. I didn't know anything. In fact, one of the trainers on that film was one of the guys who rung me, and I was on my own in Vegas, and I just, I think I think human beings are much better at coping probably than we imagine we're going to be. And I think women particularly are good. And I think, we kind of go into coping strategy, coping mode. And, I got to Phoenix and booked a flight and got there. And I didn't know when I got off that flight whether he was going to be alive or dead, to be honest, by the time I got off. I didn't know much about the injury. I knew that he'd been helicoptered from the side of the road. It obviously was very serious because they were saying you have to get here, and they would never do that. Like the team would never say, Bev, you need to come out, because, as you can see, he has a lot of people that look after him on those kind of trips. I was met in the hospital by a really lovely American doctor, and it was all kind of very odd. It's sort of like, it's so familiar to you because of ER and, American television medical dramas, that it's sort of odd, but it's strangely familiar in the same way. And obviously he was heavily sedated and had a collar, but was, and to all intents and purposes looked fine. He looked quite well, because he was fairly well. He was very well, except that he'd had a very bad... We weren't very well, but I mean, at that time in your life...
But he was in good condition.
Physically, you were in great shape, is what I mean. And so he had a tan, and he'd been running, and it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But it was the perfect introduction, actually, to brain injury as the hidden illness, because amazingly, to be hit from, we think, about 70-mile-an-hour petrol tanker, the wing mirror to the back of the head, he didn't have a broken bone in his body. He did not have he should have had a broken neck. He should never have been able to walk again, really. And he was so lucky. Bike helmet, that wasn't luck. But it sustained a frontal lobe injury, what they call a contracoup. So it's like the brain swings forward in the head. So the injury, even though the impact is to the back, the injury is to the front of the brain. James's parents came out not long after. My mum came out, and then James sort of started to come round.
Don't look at me for answers.
I know, you have no idea. You can't help me out at all, can you? And they'd established fairly quickly that he was going to live. And then they'd said, we need to watch to see if we need to do brain surgery if the brain continues to swell. I mean, in some ways, it was great that we were in America, because the care there for that kind of injury, or for anything in that kind of setting, is the best in the world. And so we had a month in Arizona, in Phoenix.
And how long was it before you got some, James came round and was able to converse with you?
Well, I can't really remember. It was a few days of sort of touch and go, and and the thing is, they couldn't say, he will be fine. They just can't say that about the brain, because it will affect people in different ways. And in fact, the severity of James's injury, there's just no way that he should be able to stand here and talk to you like this. It's incredible. Then he did start to come round and was clearly mad as a box of frogs.
He was incredibly posh, you said.
He was incredibly posh. Yeah. He started talking in this accent. And
that's too long with Matthew Pinsent.
Yeah. And Ben Fogle, isn't it?
And well.
And was sort of asking to use the water closet and talking about, when I was in the household cavalry, there was this one occasion, and it was freaky, trippy, like you would think it was past life stuff, seriously, the craziness that was coming out of his mouth. And as much as, we laugh about it now, we laughed about it then. His parents and I were just doubled over some days in the hospital, because it was just ridiculous. But I think it's that kind of that coping strategy. And I think Mother Nature's very clever. You need something to drag you through those dark times when it seems so desperate. And he was bloody hilarious.
Right. So you're just pleased he was there and being funny and, coming out of this?
Yeah, it was still, it was a bit like that, and I found out I was pregnant 9 days after the accident.
Right. So he's lying there. And
with child number 3.
Number 3 child inside you, and he's in this situation.
Yeah, that was a low point, to be honest. Well, it was and it wasn't. In some way, it was great. But in another way, it was, oh God, how am I going to deal with this? Because, we weren't quite sure how we would, what the care was going to be, how we were going to manage the recovery. I really, throwing a new baby into all that as well.
And you took him home after a month or so, is that right?
Well, I think what would have been weirder for you was sort of, because the staff see a traumatic brain injury victim so regularly, the sort of normalised, they go, oh, they always do that, as though you're some part of a new civilization. So when when I was sitting up and able to eat, that they bring you, starter, main course, and dessert, and I just mix it all together. And because you're not really sure what you're doing, and I still have no sense of taste or smell, so it doesn't really matter what, it could be anything. And so Bev says that she and my mum and dad look at me just pouring my custard on top of my pasta, or on top of my burger. And the staff are going, oh, they always do that, as though I've suddenly joined this group. And that must have been really hard for them. And then on top of that, I then insult the nurse, which I didn't think was an insult.
You insulted everybody.
No, I didn't think it was an insult. It's that I asked her if she was a running back, which is an American football position, because apparently she had a very, very powerfully built backside, / large, and I...
Perfectly fair question.
Yeah, he asked if she put some time in with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
But that's because even though that I would have, if you'd known anything about American football, that I did watch a bit of it, that there's this guy running back, which is like...
Don't try and justify.
No, it's a position of, so if you take rugby, it's the centre, so the guy who sort of runs, where Will Carney used to play and Will Greenwood, and there's this guy, Pittsburgh Steelers, who must have won the Super Bowl a couple of years before we went, and he had a very powerful backside. He was called the Fun Bus. And
I think you called her the Fun Bus.
And I may have actually called her the Fun Bus.
I think you did. And then he rang me.
I can't remember, luckily.
In the hotel one morning, and we had to confiscate phones and change email passwords and everything because he was trying to. This is a couple of weeks in. He was trying to communicate with the outside world and still thought he was fine. There was no problem. Everybody else had gone mad. He was completely normal. And he rang me at the hotel and said, you've got to bring me some extra kit to the hospital. And I said, right, okay, what do you mean? And I'm thinking, where is this going? He said, I need some running kit and I need some extra kit, orange preferably. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm representing Holland in the synchronised pooing championships. Seriously.
I don't know. Okay.
Our 9-year-old loves that story. A 9-year-old boy thinks that is brilliant.
I think you could organise an event to do that. That would be good.
Yeah.
So,
again, that's one I'll take Matthew Pinson to.
Okay.
He's a big fella. He's got skills in that area.
I guess for all of us sitting here people who didn't know you previous to the accident, you look like a very happy pair who get on well and have known each other forever. But Bev, he's quite different from before.
Yeah.
Or to some extent. He's obviously not as different as when he was posh and pooing for Netherlands. But he's still a bit different.
Yeah, he is. He is different. I mean, we're probably both different because, the experience has changed us. But it's been a very long, slow, difficult road of 2.5 years of recovery. But the frontal lobe controls your personality, and it's how you understand emotion, it's how you communicate. James won't remember any of the time of coming home from the hospital, but he was very angry. And it's typical, unfortunately, of how we look after people in this country who have a brain injury. We send them home, and they go home to families with small children, and they are a completely different person. They bear no resemblance to the kind and considerate.
You're talking in the general now, but
in the general term, but it applies
like
specifically to James. Yeah, and actually, what it does when I say it bears no resemblance, the way the neurologist described it to me is he will be more of himself. So people with frontal lobe injury often become a kind of evil caricature of themselves. So if you can imagine your partner's worst traits and magnify them by 100 and take away all the good stuff, that's kind of what you're left with for all. It's not like that now. I should just point, this is 2.5 years.
That's what it was like when he landed back at home after a month.
Yeah, and it was like that for a long time. But I mean, I think actually the drive that we were talking about at the beginning of the chat, the whole, wanting to be as good as he could possibly be, James is just in very typical fashion has applied that mentality to his recovery, and I think the exercise actually helped. He's in the gym every day, and he has been since the day of the accident. That getting physically well, trying to be fit and healthy, I think has put him in great stead.
But in this case, James, you're going to the South Pole. It's clear how you're going to train for that. You're going to try an Olympic gold medal in rowing. It's clear how you're going to train for that. In this context, you've said, I'm trying to get back to being James Cracknell. There's no roadmap for that. So what have you done to try to sort of recover what you want to recover of your...
Yeah, no, you're right. There is no... That's the one thing. There is no objective scale to work along to. A lot of it's subjective, and people often don't say what they think. They may say something after they've seen you to someone else, but they never really say it to your face, whether you're different or really, you get angry slightly differently. I'd sort of like, I guess, doing something productive, like, because I wasn't able to go back to, say, write for a newspaper, or go back to sort of other work. I would sort of get fit. It was something I could control, and then I'd have to see neurologist, neuropsychologist, occupational therapist, and you spend a lot of time talking about yourself and about issues that you probably avoided. And we didn't really see a sports psychologist when I was competing. It was we'd luckily in a team, so we'd talk to each other about it, and so it was something that was aimed to me. It's taken me time to get to a position where I understood that this was an area that I had to work on as well, and to really buy into it in order to progress, because it's not fair on Bev or the kids if you're reacting differently or quicker to a certain situation you would have in the past, because Bev's had a different husband for the last 3 years than she had for the first 7, and my little boy's had a different dad for the last 3 years than he had for the first 6, because I get angry and aren't consistent. I think that's all kids especially want, is a consistency in their life. And if I'm behaving like his age 1 minute and then like a really grumpy granddad the next minute, it's hard, in terms of being fixated on certain things like table manners, of which I'm not the best at anyway, but he's, it just means eating a meal is not fun for him to be with me, and that's been the hardest thing.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, on a good day, I kind of go, well, who wants to be married to the same man for 10 years anyway? Not me. I was ready for a new one. But actually, but then on a hard day, it can be quite difficult.
And James, did you get to was there a period during which you had to accept that you were different? Because it sounds like you felt everything you were doing was normal and you. Was there a period during which you realised that things had changed? You said people weren't treating you differently, but you were conscious they were saying something afterwards.
Well, the answer is yes, in a number of different ways. Because the Olympics were here, and I got back to working, or I worked for LOCOG, the company that organised the Olympics, and so I actually did a speech to one of the Olympic sponsors, and they, on behalf of LOCOG, and the guy gave me a briefing before and afterwards. He said, to talk about certain things, and he said, you hit every one of them. That was very good, especially for a guy with a brain injury. And I didn't, and right since the accident, I haven't wanted to be judged on any other scale. It's okay, Lance Armstrong's a bad thing to use that's very good, especially for someone who's had cancer. Apart from pumping yourself with drugs, it's like the reality is you don't want to be judged along any other guideline, and that's been one of the things that has been hard. And then also, we with our third child, we need to get a bigger house, and then phone up and try to get a mortgage, and they're like, well, we can't guarantee your earnings over the next 10 years. And I'm saying, well, who can? Yeah. But it's not because of that, it's because of, a brain injury. So whether it's practical, emotional, or being judged is very difficult. And the one thing that I found from the medical to friends to colleagues is that people are very quick to impose a ceiling on you and think, well, you won't be able to do that. So if people lower their expectation of you, and then that affects your expectation of yourself. And if you only aspire to that ceiling, that's the only place you're going to reach. And there were too many, in our side, I think there were too many dream takers there, whether it be you're in a pub with mates and you go, I'm going to ask that girl out, and they go, she's out of your league. You'll never bother. Or my dad saying, when I said I want to go to the Olympics, he went, a lot of people tried to do that. And so if you listen to those things, you're never going to do it. Whether it's starting a business and someone goes, most failed in 3 years, you never go, and all those things chip away at someone's belief to go for it. And that's really happened over the last couple of years. And I just think it's very hard for someone who maybe wasn't so, I say stubborn, as though it's a bad
Stubborn's
thing.
a good word.
Yeah. As someone as stubborn as me, they think, oh, I'm going to prove you wrong, or justify what you say, rather than just treating me as a statistic. That you need to justify that. And I think it's really important for anyone who's not just suffered a brain injury, but is going through a tough time or wants to achieve something else, or has a different, wants to move their life on, not to feel they're being imposed on by other people, and then the limits are being set by something from outside. But
at home, it sounds like the people aren't imposing that on you; they're expecting you to.
Well, I hope so, and it's been difficult. The hardest.
How do you do support? How do you do supporting role now?
The biggest thing is a nag of trying to get him to rest a bit and slow down. That's probably one of the hardest things. And then I don't know. Now I have to kind of let him get on with it. I spent a lot of time. Especially when he first came out of the hospital and he wanted to go and enter the Great North Run in a wheelchair. And
so spent some time saying no at that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had to do quite a lot of stepping in at the beginning and just going, and dealing with his agents and just like trying to, just being the jailer and just saying, I know he seems okay to you, but trust me, he's not. And so I had a lot of time doing that. And then it's...
See, that's interesting, because you wanted to get me into a wheelchair when we were in America.
What do you mean?
Because we're at when we flew back from America, getting out of the hospital, we're checking into the airport annex. I had to have a doctor with me on the plane and check in, and the lady said, you can use a wheelchair to take you to the plane. And
of course, he was just like,
I was like, I can walk, I'm fine. And Bev goes, take the wheelchair, we'll get to the front of the queue.
Get in the bloody wheelchair, stop moaning, there's a massive queue.
So in the end, the compromise was Bev put the bags in the wheelchair and pushed to the front of the queue.
I said, I'm pregnant.
So apologies if anyone was at the...
I was going to sit in the wheelchair. But yeah, I mean, it's that pride and that stubbornness, which can be difficult, but actually, like I say, is probably why his recovery's been so good, is because of that mentality of saying, I will prove you wrong.
So there's lots more in the book, and it's not actually a book really about the sporting endeavours at all. It's about rebuilding a person, I guess, after... I
think so. I mean, there's quite a bit of sort of, I guess, of some rowing stuff, childhood stuff, to just kind of give you a sense of who James was before the accident, and then
I like the way you build up the rowing and the childhood into just the new stuff.
But actually, we couldn't not write this book. Yeah. We have been through...
What drove you to write it then?
Because there is so little out there for people with a brain injury in terms of how you support families and how you cope with it. There was one little book that I was given by a physio in the hospital in Phoenix called Where is the Mango Princess, which is an amazing book written by the wife of a brain injured man who was a journalist as well. And her book is amazing, and she's actually sadly died. But we inspired by that largely. We sort of thought we've got to do it. James has been asked to do autobiography so many times before, and he'd always just gone, I'm not really done anything. And actually, we just thought, well, there's a reason for this. We can't not write it. And in fact, the response we've had from families who've had similar injuries has been immense.
Well, I was saying over lunch that my kid didn't know who James was, but his name came up during the summer, and he said, oh yeah, he made that great video about wearing a bike helmet. And so now actually people are being encouraged to wear bike helmets as a result. But I want to give people, we've got a couple of minutes left, any chance for anybody to ask questions of this amazing couple. Now's your opportunity.
Here we go. Ooh.
Nobody?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh.
Thank you very much, first of all, for coming in and sharing your story. Very inspiring. I had a question for both of you, really. You talked about your kids before. And I guess if one day one of them comes up to you and says, I want to become a professional athlete, like what would your response be? What would your advice be, given all you went through?
Well, I guess it would depend how old he was, or she was.
Yeah, did you see that?
Yes, I saw that. I saw that. He's going to be a swimmer.
Even though one's 9, the others haven't really started anything.
No.
But it's no.
Our little girl is the most competitive. The middle one is the most competitive. Our 9-year-old has not got this competitive drive at all. He's a very, very good swimmer. And we're kind of doing everything we can to kind of encourage them at the moment. But I think it's our middle one I'm going to have to watch. She's pretty, everything is a competition. Finishing dessert, putting your shoes on, putting your coat on. You know, I've won, Mummy. You know, so actually, in a way, I kind of, with her, we sort of, I spend all the time saying it's not a competition, Kiki. And yet with our eldest, sometimes he needs a bit of a push. So I think they'll sort themselves out whether they'd want to be athletes.
No, I think it's more that not to specialise too early is what I would say. That if he came now saying at 9, saying I want to be a swimmer, I would go, you know, do you really want to count tiles for the rest of your life? There's a reason why swimmers give up at 25. You know, that's. I think just to enjoy sports, try many different ones, and then, you know, if you are best at the one you enjoy most, then you know, that's the one for you. Whereas if you kind of, we don't want to press them into it, but we're not going to let them give up, you know, straight away.
And I think also, you know, education as well. You know, that would be kind of what I would, you know, I swam actually, so I'm just ignoring the digs. But we both went to university, and I would just kind of, you know, I would encourage them to do that, but get your studies as well.
Swimming's got a slightly bad place in our house because her mum's a swimming coach, and her brother went to the Athens Olympics in the British swimming team, and which is brilliant. We have a bit of a jab that if we used to come down, and, you know, you get a slightly stiff back rowing. Generally, is sort of one thing, and you kind of go, oh, I've got a sore back today. The coach would go, just go swimming. So for me, it's more rehab than a sport.
That's about right.
And it's like the coach wouldn't go, just go and scrummage for an hour or something. You've got a bad back. But it really drilled home swimming as the devil sport when at the Olympics. Yes, okay. The Olympics that there's okay. Stop it. Do you want to interrupt and keep the clock going down?
Carry on.
Right. That AD, Brad's brother, was competing as well, and his 2 events were on the same morning as my heat and my semi, and so I can understand Bev going, her parents going, but even my parents went to watch him swim, and their logic was, "Oh, you'll be in the final." I was like, "We haven't got a bye."
Very unsupportive.
So, yeah.
Very unsupportive parents, James had, is the answer to that question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi there. So I have a husband who always has a kind of crazy running or cycling scheme, and the latest one is like run the Lebanon Mountain Trail, not to give you any ideas, of course, but do you carry the veto in your household? So is there a time where you can say, no, you're not doing that, or do you feel like, no, just kind of let James go?
I never did before the accident. I never said he couldn't do something. I'd always said, you know, I'd look at the safety, look at how it would work out with the lifestyle, but I completely trusted him to go and do them, whereas actually post-accident now I kind of go, no, that's not happening. And then he went to do, he actually did an amazing trip, again, the Discovery Channel filmed it, which was to the Yukon, which was the coldest race on earth, after the accident. And I spent hours on the phone to the medics, to the insurance people, to the production, like just making sure that everything was done to make it safe. And that was the condition that he had to go under, that people he was with understood the nature of his injury, and they understood him and knew him well enough to know when his behaviour might be just fatigue and when it might be actually something that he was actually struggling with. So, you know, I think once you have children, it's much easier to make demands because it's a shared responsibility. And, you know, I think you just have to keep talking about them, don't you, ultimately?
But the other thing is...
And make sure all the safety's in place that it possibly can be.
And that's a really interesting question, because the hardest thing for me, and which will go back to answer the question, has been, because when I had the accident and woke up, that everyone was used to me not being me, because it had been, and my first memories of 6 or 7 weeks after the accident, that everyone had become normalised to me not being quite, you know, well, firstly not being at all normal, and then being slightly more normal. But I had a couple of seizures which are related to lack of sleep, and although there's 3 or 4 hours where I don't remember anything and wake up in hospital, it's been the reaction of, you know, having been with Bev and our kids beforehand, and then seeing them a few hours later afterwards. And for them, I was suddenly the daddy that was not well in Phoenix, and that was why I hadn't seen them before. From being normal, for me being normal that evening, that, you know, the next time I saw them, I was that unwell person again. Whereas I actually felt okay. It's just had a seizure and had to go to the hospital. But they're sort of the bit I never saw of how horrible it was for them was really highlighted to me. And that's in some of the trips I've done, whether it be the Atlantic or the South Pole, a lot of it has been, you know, going without sleep. That's something that I can't do anymore. So I in terms of an event, that's the one thing Bev will always ask. And
the epilepsy is quite a big deal now for me.
Because after every seizure, you can't drive for a year. So I've only been able to drive for 2 weeks since the accident 3 years ago, which then places more stress on Bev because, you know, she's the only one who can drive, so she's almost got 4 kids.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Final question.
Thanks so much for coming. Sorry, I was reading the other day that the 8 fastest rowers don't necessarily make the fastest boat.
I would argue that, yeah.
Well, I was wondering how you dealt with that back in Athens, for instance. You might have had 4 fantastic athletes, but how do you mould that into a great team? And linked to that, how you dealt with your row across the Atlantic? Because can I assume that you were perhaps a slightly more strong athlete than Ben? Maybe?
Yeah, no, probably I'll start with the Atlantic. Yeah, it was interesting going into that event. You think, well, there's this area of expertise where I will be will have more understanding of and be better at. Actually, is one small part of a big jigsaw, because at the Olympics you do feel like you're doing everything because you're doing all the training, but you almost forget or ignore the physiologists, the coaches, the nutritionists, other people helping you. And when you have to do all that yourself, the rowing bit is actually only a very small part of it. And a lot of it, as I said before, is keeping positive, making the right decisions at the right time, and the ability to keep going is actually, you know, okay, when we're actually rowing, would the boat go faster when I was rowing it than when he was rowing it? Yeah, probably would. But spread over 50 days and 3,000 miles, it gets reduced significantly. And I think it's the ability to stay positive and you know, determined to hit your objective that is as important, rather than that speed. So I think it does level out, and especially as your decisions you make in that process about, you know, the little things in, you know, ultimately then it would be the technology or the equipment or something would let you down that you had to mend out there.
But just talk about, James, just talk about, so your first gold was Redgrave's last gold, and you're in the boat with him and Matt, so there's
I felt his fifth slightly overshadowed my first.
Yes, it was a bit rude of him. But also he was going through all kinds of medical traumas himself, with colitis and everything else, so you end up actually kind of almost carrying the load that he was bringing to the boat as well. That must have been quite a difficult team to put together in that context.
It was difficult, and that's where, you know, you have, you know, rowing, as you know, Matt, is very different from other sports. It's not like playing football for Barcelona, and I'm sure they're all good footballers, but if I was playing for Barcelona, I would think I'd give the ball to Messi as soon as possible. Whereas rowing, you are only, in a 4-man boat, you're only 25% of it, yet you're relying on 3 other people to deliver their 100%, and you each do have a kind of vaguely specific role. Although you're doing 90% of the same thing, you need to be stronger in one area than the other. And in the 4 I was in for, the Sydney Olympics, rowing with, you think we got 29 gold medals in London, we got 1 in Atlanta, and that was Redgrave and Pinson. But for me coming in, yes, there was the pressure of their Olympic history from them, but also from my perspective was none of us had any gold medals, because that's the one we all wanted. It didn't matter what you had in your bag at home, that was kind of irrelevant on the start line. And what I tried to get to them was that, you know, which annoyed them quite a lot was that what was good enough there is not going to be good enough now. And so if you're going to produce in 4 years what you did 4 years ago and expect to win, you ain't going to get anything.
You told them this.
I did tell them that, yeah.
Daily, from what?
Daily, and you try to, basically I would try to just make sure I beat them in training every day, because it would generally annoy them after a while. And the more angry they got, they would probably take it out ultimately on the other people.
There's actually a great documentary you guys made. Was it Gold
Gold Fever,
Gold
yeah.
Fever. If you want to
Yeah.
look on YouTube, you'll find it.
Yeah, it was. They followed. So the BBC followed us for 4 years, and it was interesting. Steve got diabetes, and it was hard. You think anyone you've met is stubborn. You've no idea that when he got told he had diabetes, he wouldn't believe the doctor, and he would kind of have a sort of lack of insulin. Glycemic situation, we'd find him asleep in a corner, and he would just be refused to take it at that stage. And even at the Olympic final, I had sugar taped to my feet just in case he had got it wrong. It only took him a few weeks to realise he may actually have diabetes, but he never ever used it as an excuse or felt sorry for himself. He was just, okay, that's something I've got to deal with, and that's fine. It's just.
It sounds like you're taking that attitude to your life at the moment. So I think we have to wrap it up there. Huge thank you to Bev and to James for coming and sharing their story.